Hello and welcome everyone. My name is AdlerGG and this is a video about Dispels, strong Dispels and Purge. This video can be found exclusively on Gamers Class. So before we hop into all the different things on the topic, I want to make sure that you read tooltips. So if you play a hero and you wanna know if stuff is dispellable or not dispellable, please make sure that you take a look at the tooltip. So if you take a look at Windrun, for example, it applies a buff and it says dispellable yes. So in this case you can dispel the buff. The same applies to offensive stuff. So here you have Venomous Scale, which applies a damage over time effect. And you see dispellable yes. So please make sure you take a look at tooltips.
If you like this type of content, go to gamersclass.com. For just $5 a month, get your replays analyzed, join monthly live sessions with pro players, get access to our entire content library, win prizes, and more with our supreme Dota 2 membership.
Let's start with the first thing, Dispel. So Dispel can be acquired on certain items and can also be found on certain abilities. It is important to mention that if we talk about Dispel, or generally if you hear someone talk when it's Dota related and he says Dispel, it always means that we dispel a harmful debuff on our hero, or we dispel a harmful debuff on a friendly hero or unit. You can also dispel summons and neutrals, of course, which can be very handy sometimes. And it is important that we understand what generally can be removed with Dispel. So most slows, most silences, most roots, breaks, blind, hacks, debreak, and most damage over time stuff can be simply dispelled as long as you have an item, an ability, or anything that can dispel basically. So this means that Dispels counters heroes heavily with slows, roots, silences, as well as hexes. And it's also super important to note that damage over time effects can simply be dispelled. So if you remove them before they do damage, damage over time, heroes get countered heavily by Dispel. It is also important to mention that there's a few items that dispel. So we have BKB, which applies a dispel. We have Manta Style, which applies a dispel. Yule Scepter, if you use yourself, and the Lotus Orb. So there's a lot of abilities that allow you to dispel yourself or your teammates. And I don't want to go into detail about an entire list because it can change from patch to patch. And we don't want to remake the videos all the time for those basic mechanics. So just keep in mind that a lot of stuff changes and you can find the information for certain skills in the tooltips. Another very important component in Dota 2 gameplay is the strong Dispel. So strong Dispels can only be found on hero abilities. They're the only way in the game to remove stuns. So hexes basically do the same as stun, but stuns can only be removed by strong Dispels. Some heroes can remove their own stuns if the ability allows it to be cast during a stun basically, but that's a very rare case. And there's basically a few heroes that have strong Dispels at their disposal. It's like 9 heroes. And this might change over time because there's some talents that interact, especially level 25 talents on heroes that interact with strong Dispel mechanics. So it's basically important to know that there's a few heroes that can remove stuns on themselves. And there's also a few heroes that can remove stuns from friendly heroes, and those heroes are basically hard counter to any long stuns because there's a lot of heroes with very, very long stun durations, like a Bane or a Beastmaster, and they get hard countered by heroes with a strong Dispel. So there's 3 heroes that have a strong Dispel on allies, which are Abaddon on Aphotic Shield, Legion Commander with Press the Attack, and Oracle with False Promise. So if one of your teammates is stunned and you play against these heroes, or if you play one of these heroes, you can remove stuns, and if you play against these heroes, you need to be super careful that they not instantly remove stuns and counterplay on you. The last thing I want to talk about is the term Purge, or purging spells or buffs. So Purge describes the offensive usage of a dispelling ability. So purging a unit will remove useful buffs like Monkey King stacks, for example, Bloodlust, or a Yule Scepter lift, or Ghost Scepter. So there's basically buffs that can be purged. There's item effects that also buff that can be purged. And you basically just need to apply any form of offensive Dispel to remove them. The important part is that the abilities that you want to use to offensively Dispel need to be, or that they can be cast on enemies. So here's an example on Oracle. So Fortune's End has a Dispel component in it, which you can find in the tooltip. So there's a few abilities in the game that can basically offensively Dispel, so Purge. There is items in the game that can also offensively purge, and purge generally speaking, and there's also neutral units and summons that can purge. It is very important that you understand what debuffs in the game can be dispelled by just reading the tooltips if you play against it. And then think about, if the buffs the units receive are strong, that you think about a way to purge the buffs somehow with either neutral abilities or buying an item that can purge, like Yule Scepter. So it is important that when we speak about Dota, like, the game is super complex and there's a lot of different interactions, that we have a clean wording and people know what we are talking about. So since Warcraft 3, there's like Dispels basically, and the game is very old. And back in the days when we were talking about offensive Dispels, we always meant Purge, because all abilities were called Purges if they would offensively Dispel. So if you talk with other players, so make sure that you mention if you talk about offensively dispelling, that you say, okay, you can dispel this offensively, or you can simply use the term Purge. A lot of old school players will understand. And for strong Dispels, that we understand that strong Dispels remove stuns. And when we talk about Dispels or basic Dispels, that we always mean that we remove stuff from ourselves, or that we remove stuff from our teammates which they're debuffed. So if your teammates get debuffed, you dispel them. And if you offensively dispel a useful buff from an enemy, we're talking about Purge. Okay? So this is basically everything for Dispels, strong Dispels and Purges. My name is LRG and thanks for watching.